Anyway, can everybody hear me okay? I wasn't sure. Do any of you remember from last year my fisherman friend from Booth Bay Harbor, Ron Richardson, and his stern man, Bert? Ron couldn't make it tonight. He had to go to a funeral for Bert's mother-in-law who fell overboard and drowned. But he asked me if I could fill in for him. I'm John Richardson, his twin brother. And I live in Seboomook, which is a small town in the boondocks in northern Maine in the woods, up there at the tip end of Moosehead Lake. I work in the woods and I cut pulpwood for that paper company over there in Millinocket. Some of you might know about that. Seboomook is a small town. I said it's a small town. Well, we got a population of 13. But when you come in town, we got a really nice sign. It's about yay wide and somewhere around yay high. And it says on it, "Welcome to Seboomook." And if you look at the backside, it says, "Come again, leaving Seboomook." Seboomook is actually a small fishing town. Squeaky O'Neill is one of our best fishermen. And he, unfortunately, had an accident a few years ago. It seems he was walking along the railroad tracks and a train come by, clipped his right arm off right at the shoulder, and the whole arm went away and they never saw it again. But he's recovered, and he still holds the record for the largest bass ever caught in Wampum Lake. I asked Squeaky about that. Squeaky, what was the size of that big bass you got several years ago up at Wampum? Squeaky says, "Oh, it was about yay big." Fishermen aren't liars, we know that, but sometimes there are extenuating circumstances. Take, for example, Digger Odell. He's the town undertaker. Digger was fishing one day on Moosehead Lake, and he'd come up dry, not caught nothing. But at the very end of the day, as he was getting ready to leave, he caught a big one. It was a son of a gun. In fact, it was gigantic. It was 17 foot, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. It was a 17-pound lake trout. That's what it was. So he put it in a sack and he put his gear together and started home. Unfortunately, he ran into a game warden that popped out of the bushes on his way home, and the warden says, "I know you've been fishing, Digger. Let me see what you got in the sack." Well, he looked in the sack, and would you believe it? Would you believe it? He looked in there and found that that 17-pound lake trout was a female fish that was pregnant. And while she was in that sack, gave birth to 6 more trout. And that put him one over the limit. But I gotta wind it up like I usually do with a little special story at the end. This one's about Ron and Bert down there in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine on their lobster boat, the Miss Laurie. It turns out, you remember, that I said that Bert's mother-in-law drowned. You know, it's interesting what happened to her. About a month ago, I went down to the harbor and went ready to go out fishing with Bert and Ron. We were at the dock about 7 a.m., all set to go. And as I recall, Ron said, "Okay, let's get her started." He turned the switch on for the engine to give her a spark. It was the old kind of ignition kind. He gave it the spark, and he told Bert to turn her over. "Bert, give her a good turn." Well, Bert put his gloves on, and he gave that flywheel a good twist. Whoosh. Excuse me. Whoosh. But she didn't stop. "Give her another one, Bert." She didn't start again, but it was a cold morning. "Try her one more time in earnest, Bert." Well, pretty soon he got her going pretty good. But just about that time, we heard this awful noise from what sounded like an old Chevy pickup with a bad muffler up at the head end of where the wharf was, and it was coming along. And when it got to the head of the wharf, it turned and then slowly came down the wharf towards us. And they got almost down to us, and then it stopped on the dock right beside the Miss Lorry. The door opened, and this balloon of a woman slowly started to come out. I swear she was bigger than that bluefin tuna we caught last summer that weighed 355 pounds. Watching her get out of that was sort of like watching molasses flow slowly out of the jug. And was she ugly too? Oh, I haven't mentioned it. Why, even the peeping Toms in town cross the street and close their eyes when they see her walking by. Now, unfortunately, Bert recognized the woman and he says, "Oh, geez, oh, I'm in trouble. That's my mother-in-law. And we don't get along at all." Well, she come right up to the end of the gangplank and she says this, "Bert, I know you're on board. Now, for 2 weeks, you've been putting off trying to get me to go out with you, and by George, I told you I want to learn about this lobster fishing business. Well, today's the day, buddy, and I'm coming aboard." And before I knew it, somehow she rolled herself up the gangplank and settled herself midships right beside the bait barrel with the fresh herring that we just finished loading. Ron knew that he couldn't argue with her, so he just let the engine go. We took the little Miss Lorry slowly out into the harbor. And as you know, in the morning, there's always a gentle swell out there. It's not very nice. In fact, it's rather nice to see the sun coming up and you have this nice little gentle swell. It starts the day off real nice. But anyway, by the time we cleared the breakwater, it started to roll up a little bit. And I noticed that Martha was her name, Martha had grabbed the port gunwale and was hanging on with both hands and wasn't saying anything. Of course, that was a good thing. And so anyway, by the time we get out to the end of the breakwater, it was getting a little bit rougher. And at the very end, we started hitting those 6-foot standing waves that usually are out there. Now, if you know anything about standing waves, you have to hit them head on, and the boat starts to pitch, and you're going like this. And of course, the swell's taking you like that a little bit, you know? And so we're hitting these big 6-footers. And I noticed that Martha, who normally has a pale, wrinkled countenance, began to shift to sort of like a plastic gray, moving rather quickly into a murky green. Now you know where we're going with this one. Anyway, we cleared the breakwater and kept on heading on out. The swells were getting a little bit bigger, and we started shipping water, which is pretty normal when you get into 3 or 4 foot swells. And I heard Ron say, "You know, Bert, it's going to be probably a pretty rough day out there today." Bert just said, yeah, that probably is. Anyway, we got out almost to Burnt Island Lighthouse at marker number 2, when suddenly it really began to swell up. Why, the waves was coming 4 to 6 feet, and we was rocking. We'd sort of go off to port side, and then we'd slowly come back to starboard side. And we kind of noticed that at the same time, that was what was happening to Martha. She'd sort of roll down the port gunwale, across the floorboards, up onto the starboard gunwale, back down again. Now, we tried to help her, help the poor lady by grabbing a hold of her, but we couldn't, because everywhere we tried to grab a hold, it was slippery on her round body. So anyway, we kept on going. We had almost got ready to haul the first trap. Now remember the environment we were in. We were sort of, rocking this way, rocking up that way. Martha was rolling around. Everything was kind of rolling. And by the time we were ready to haul that first trap, the inevitable happened. The yellow mess that was her breakfast kept pouring out of her like a fountain and poured all over the top of the bake barrel and all the fresh dead herring that we had inside. You can imagine that was quite a mess, and it stunk like nothing you ever want to get close to, that's for sure. So all we could do was kind of keep on going. After a while, we really got into a mess because the waves got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we were just rolling and then rolling over this way and then rolling back that way. And we were now into those 6 to 7 footers and occasionally an 8. And if you know anything about waves, you know you don't want to be in those any longer than you have to be. Okay, poor Martha. Anyway, well, what happened was all of a sudden we got hit by a real bad roller. And she tilted, Miss Laurie tilted way over to the port side. And quick as a flash, Martha, who was hanging on to the starboard gunwale, slid down that gunwale, rolled through the water on top of the floorboards, shot up on the port gunwale, went straight on out and was overboard, and the whole thing only took about 4 seconds. Well, by the time that we got the Miss Laurie leveled out again, Martha was gone. Well, what we did was we sort of kept around for 10 minutes looking for her. That was the engine. But she didn't surface. So we said, well, I suppose the only thing we can do is keep on hauling and setting traps. So we did for another 8 hours till the end of the day, and then we headed back to shore. The family was upset and disappointed, of course, but they realized there was nothing further that could be done. Now, it turns out that about 2 weeks later, Bobby Holbrook, who fishes lobsters up off Pimquid, that's about 10 miles north of us, was fishing and he hauled up Martha. And he knew about what had happened, so he got on the radio and called over to Miss Laurie so he could let Ron and Bert know what happened. Well, said Bert, what kind of condition was she in? And Bobby says, well, I hate to tell you, but frankly, she was pretty well stove up. But you know what? There was 8 lobsters stuck on her body, attached really good. And the best thing was, there was 2 humongous ones. They was running between 3 and 4 pounds each, attached to each toe. What do you think I ought to do? Well, Bert said, well, Bobby, if I was you, I'd have you send the lobsters to me and set her again. And on that note, I think I'm going to go down and have some pop.
Ron, good job. Ron's treating everybody here to lobsters, too. Right, Ron? Good job.